This episode of Nos Audietis is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Audietis since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Hi, I'm Will Bruin, and I was just recognized as a Seattle Sounders legend. Now I get to do voice reads for the Sounder at Heart podcast network.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
A save by Fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Reyes through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nicoladero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is campeón!
It's gone! It's gone! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
We want to win. It's Seattle Sounders, bro.
Porter says cheated.
What was the thought process in terms of who you decided to use and who you didn't?
Ever since Sounder Carr wrote a commentary that we didn't take Open Cup seriously.
Welcome back to another episode of Nos Audietis, sponsored by Full Pull Wines. I am John Shan, and I'm joined by my co-host Aaron Campo and our engineer Lickett. This is the Mailbag episode for August of 2024. So I guess we should just get right into this thing, Aaron.
Yeah. All right. Our first one is from Ken W. It's very likely we won't bring in any outside talent during the summer transfer window. This question was asked before the close of the summer transfer window. Ken is obviously very prescient. We did not bring any talent in during the window. This would make us the first MLS club in close to 10 years to go 3 consecutive summer windows without a signing. Is this likely to be our new normal or just a one-off or rare occurrence? Has our focus on ROI now crippled our ability to enjoy sustained results? And how, if at all, do the Sounders either break that cycle or find a better balance?
Ooh, there's a lot there. I would hope that this is a weird quirk of the sort of roster build that they are sort of this roster cycle they're sort of stuck in, where they perpetually have been stocking their roster in a way that doesn't give them a lot of flexibility for the summer. And I think that was basically what happened this year, where even though they had some room, they felt reason. And I don't think it's crazy to feel like they were satisfied with the depth of the roster, and where they felt like they needed help was at the top end of the roster. And if they couldn't really find help at the top end of the roster, that they weren't going to make a move. I would think they aren't going to make a habit of doing that, because in part because I think they are seeing quite the frustration that it causes, and it does sort of like tie your hands that you can't keep up. And somehow every other team in the league basically manages to thread this needle, and the Sounders haven't been. So I don't know. I hope it's not the new normal. As far as the need for ROI crippling their ability to have sustained results, I hope not. I mean, I hope this is a team whose success is not just limited to the MLS era. They've always sort of been a successful organization. And I really hope that this is not a harbinger of things to come. I do think we're going to learn a lot about this team and in the winter. Like, I think we're going to learn a lot about what their ambitions are, where they see themselves, because there is a lot of salary coming off the books this winter. And if they sort of do tinkering, that'll maybe tell us something. But if they go bold, which they have the opportunity to do, that'll tell us something different. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think that I was in, I don't want to say freak out mode, but I was pretty down on this team's roster strategy a couple weeks ago. And I think I feel a little better now in that I think that this is I don't really know if anything fundamentally has changed that much, which I think is a problem in and of itself, right? But I don't necessarily think that ownership has gotten less willing to spend necessarily than they used to be. But I think that the circumstances, like you said, just kind of put them into this corner where they were going to have to spend money or trade assets or maybe sell players for less than they would have liked to sell them to make the kind of flexibility, and they just weren't willing to do that. I think with the kind of cap space opening up, with the kind of positions that they need to fill, I feel based on Craig Weibel's press conference last week, whatever that was. Time is meaningless at this point in my life, but I feel pretty good that they are going to invest some serious money into the roster, and they're going to fill some of those holes. And but I think there's a good chance, unfortunately, that even if they hit those signings out of the park 3-4 years down the line, we might end up in a similar situation to this again, unless ownership in the front office are willing to be a little more flexible with roster and a little more aggressive, with wanting to force turnover.
Yeah, and I think one thing that is worth reminding ourselves of is how much of the perception of the roster is shaped by the fact that they did go out and spend a fair amount of money on Pedro de la Vega. And I don't want to overstate how much money they spent, because the reality is that it is not on the same scale as a Nico Ladero or a Raul Ruidiaz investment, but it was a significant investment. And the fact that they've gotten almost nothing out of that investment does sort of create a perception that they haven't done anything, when they did go out and make the move everyone seemed to think they should make. And I loved this move at the time. I was excited about it. I think most people were excited about it. On paper, it looked like, and the reality is that De La Vega has had a hell of a time getting on the field. And, if, at this time next year, if he's putting up the kind of numbers that we expected him to put up, I think that will color this whole last, their transfer strategy a lot differently, especially if they go out and sign a big DP this window, which that's, my hope and my expectation is that that's what they're going to do. So I don't know, we'll see. But yeah, it's not, there's not a lot of positive signs. I think it's just a matter of how negative you want to be based on this. So all right, this was from the list, and I guess a good time to remind everyone, these questions come from our Discord. You can get on our Discord if you are subscribing to Sound at Heart at the subscriber level or above. That's the $75 a year level, and we're also right now in the midst of a subscriber drive, I guess you could call. We're in the year anniversary right now. We're like literally hitting the year anniversary of Sound at Heart's independence, and if you want to help make this thing go, I would encourage you to become a subscriber. And if you are already at the supporter level, join the Discord. It's a lot of fun, even if you're just lurking. But anyway, the question from the list says, which Tacoma or Academy players might make the jump next year? Are any of them a number 6?
I think you're definitely better suited to answer this question than I am. But I don't think any of them are a 6. I'll say that.
Unfortunately.
That's a deceptively difficult position to produce, I think, at that level, because a lot of the skills that are really important for that position come with experience, and you can develop those skills and have those skills and the ability to effectively play that position at a young age. But if you do, you're probably not going to be in MLS for too long, and certainly not in MLS Next Pro. So I think that's probably that, the forward positions is probably going to be one that has to come from outside the organization. Yeah,
you're right. There's not really a 6 that I'm aware of that they're sort of deep into development on. I do think they'll sign some players from Tacoma this year. The 2 who I would most, or there's 3 probably, I think will probably get signed either this year or next. Georgie Monongu is probably the closest to an MLS contract. He is a 21-year-old Ivory Coast winger. He is a very dribbly boy. He averages almost 4 successful dribbles per 90 minutes, which is, I think, the second best in MLS Next Pro. American Soccer Analysis rates him as probably the best dribbler in MLS Next Pro. He does not quite have the finished product yet. When he gets around goal, it's not always pretty, but he does create a lot of excitement. You may remember him from the Open Cup and a couple MLS games. I think he's probably going to get signed. And then there's a 17-year-old named Snyder Burnell who does play in the central midfield. He's more of an 8. I suppose he could develop into a 6. He's 17 right now. He's at something like he's going to finish the year with about 2,500 professional minutes. They're already under his belt, which is pretty impressive. I suspect he'll get an MLS contract. And then the other one who might get an MLS contract, I think, is Kalani Kosarienzi, another player who you might be familiar with if you have been following the Defiance or you were paying close attention to the Open Cup. He did make a few appearances for the Sounders in the Open Cup and even in MLS play. He is a Bay Area native, but he went to UW. He played as more of a midfielder for UW, but has played mostly as a right back for Defiance. He's very athletic. He is pretty strong technically. I think he has a MLS future. I know a lot of the talent evaluators in the Sounders think that as well. So so there's definitely some players coming through who I think are useful.
All right. The next one is from AD Simone 206. Is there a reasonable path forward for the Sounders to be treated like a first-class tenant by First and Goal once again, and what might that look like?
Good question. I think this is really the crux of the issue when it comes to the Sounders exploring the possibility of building their own stadium at Longacres. It's that it's hard to see that path forward. As it is, the Sounders and Reign between them host a lot more events at Lumen Field than the Seahawks. They occupy the stadium for a much greater part of the year than the Seahawks. Now, obviously, they don't bring in the money that the Seahawks do, but it does feel like it's getting worse and not getting better in terms of the relationship between the Sounders and First and Goal, despite sort of having more and more events there. Just an anecdote, I guess recently this year, the First and Goal started charging the Sounders $80 a head for the media meal. And I assure you, the food they are serving does not feel like an $80 meal. And it's that kind of like stuff that I think really does create a problem for the long-term relationship, because it's becoming very expensive frankly for the Sounders to continue playing at Lumen Field, and the situation is not getting better. And I suppose that could always change. It's just a matter of someone at Vulcan or First and Goal sort of making that decision to make it better. But I don't know the numbers. I don't know exactly how all of that works, but it doesn't seem like a good situation. I don't see it getting better.
Yeah, I feel like it's not totally analogous, right? But there have definitely been situations where I have been unhappy in a job because I hadn't gotten a promotion or hadn't gotten a raise or just wasn't getting the kind of, notoriety that I felt like I should be or whatever. And you can drop strategic hints about that and about your willingness to go somewhere else, and suddenly those things start happening. And I think maybe the Sounders were a little more hopeful that they could do that with a Longacre Stadium, and First and Goal would realize, we would be losing a lot of money if these guys left.
Right.
Maybe we should do something about that. And I don't see any evidence that has happened. Now, obviously, there's still plenty of time on the Sounders lease, and maybe they don't want to make huge changes midstream, and some of that stuff might change for the better going into next season. But I'm kind of with you. I just feel like First and Goal doesn't really see any reason to make the experience better for Sounders fans. They're just tenants to them. And just a revenue stream, and the Seahawks are, by all intents and purposes, despite the stadium being publicly owned, publicly financed, the Seahawks are the only people that matter, and they're fully running the thing, which sucks really bad. I mean, there should be some kind of public lever that can be pulled to say, this is not the Seahawks stadium, it's the state of Washington stadium, and all the tenants should be treated equally to some degree, but that's not going to happen. So
I do wonder, like, I know one of the big complaints, and that you and I even talked about on the show, was sort of how many stalls are closed during Sounders games. And I haven't been to a Seahawks game, but we did compare them to both T-Mobile Park and Climate Pledge Arena, and it's not just that so many more stalls at those venues are open, it's what they're serving. And I do wonder, I honestly, this is a question I don't know the answer to, is, are even if the stalls were open, would they compare favorably?
I don't think so. I mean, I feel like the food at Lumen has always sucked compared to T-Mobile, especially, because I think most of the stuff that you can get at Climate Pledge is similar to what you can get at Lumen, but there's just like, there are some exceptions that are much, much better. And Lumen did used to have some more of those that they just aren't open now. But I think stall for stall, I don't think it would be that much better. I don't know if there were more places for me to get a hot dog that had been sitting under the heat lamp for 2 hours. I don't know that would make my experience better, because really, like, the ingress and egress and getting through concessions is pretty great. Like, it's pretty quick. You can grab your beer, grab your hot dog, whatever. That's not a problem. It's just, it sucks. Like, the food sucks. The beer's, too expensive, blah, 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 all that stuff. And I don't think we're going back to the days of, being able to get really, really good food at Sounders games anytime soon. So
yeah.
And it's like, it just doesn't lend itself to that as well as baseball or hockey do either, to be totally fair.
That's fair. Sounders, this is from Sounders fan. Good name. Jordan Morris is on pace to set career highs in appearances. His record is 44, and goals scored. His record is 14 this season. Is he aging like fine wine? Is this the best version of Jordan we've ever seen?
I think it's definitely the best version of center forward Jordan that we've ever seen. And I think that this is a very common topic of discussion in the Discord, and I think probably in the fan base at large, right? About is the right decision to go get a DP9 or to get a DP winger. And I'm pretty firmly of the belief that Jordan should stay in the 9, and he should be the guy. And that if you need to hold a DP signing to be totally sure until, if that's the DP signing you decide not to make in the winter, because you want to see how he holds up, over a full year, right, of playing that role, fair enough. But to me, I think Jordan's a much better striker right now than he is a winger, and I think that's going to continue to be the case, right? I think Jordan he's bigger, he's stronger than he used to be. I think he's better at reading the game. I think he looks more confident in front of goal than he does on the wing. I think that he makes better decisions centrally than he does on the wing. And I think physically, I think Jordan's going to be a physical specimen for a long time. I think he obviously takes really good care of himself. He hasn't lost much of his top line speed. He hasn't lost a ton of acceleration, but he's going to. And I think he can be effective as a center forward for much later into his career than he can as a winger. We've seen so many times where guys just lose not even that much, just 1 or 2 steps, but that's enough to make them significantly less effective. And I just think that that's less of a concern at the 9, at the center forward position. So I think this is the best version of himself, right? I just think he's learned so much about the game. And one of the questions I ask myself is, could he be, because we remember what Jordan was like when the first time around, when he was kind of given the keys before Raul was brought in, and he wasn't this good. And I wonder if it was just experience and time, or if him moving to the wing and developing some of those skills and maybe gaining some confidence helped. I don't know, but I feel like he's been consistent enough at that spot to think that this is not a fluke, that he is really this good. They're getting DP production out of him, right? Like, he's not playing like one of the most elite strikers in the league, but he's playing, anybody would be happy with his production if he were on, I think $2.5-3 million a year as a DP, right? So I just don't know why you want to move him to a position where he's not quite as effective, where he, maybe isn't going to age as well, to bring in somebody from outside of the outside when you could just sign a winger. That's not what the question was, but it's a hobby horse for me.
I think it's a fair issue though. And I guess the question I have, and I don't know this answer, but I spent a bunch of time researching potential number 9 signings, and there are a lot. Like, you can go out there and without spending too crazy, you can find players with pretty good resumes who I think would be very good number 9s. And I wonder if part of the thinking is the Sounders just believe it's easier to go find an upgrade at number 9 than to pay what it would cost to upgrade Jordan on the wing, if that makes sense. And,
that's fair. Yeah.
And I don't know that, again, I don't know the if that's really the answer, but I do think that's part of the equation, is that, you can throw a stone and find, if you're willing to spend $10 million, if you're willing to make a $10 million investment, there is no shortage of number 9s out there who on paper look like they will kill it, right? Whereas you have an example like a Denny Bouanga. Sure, if you can go out and find me Denny Bouanga, do that and put Jordan at the 9. But it seems like Bouanga, at like the LAFC struck gold with that. They didn't have to invest that much. Like, really, it wasn't that big of an investment to bring him in. But I also wonder if he's sort of like the 99th percentile version of what you get at that investment. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I definitely think that the best decision to make is the holistic best decision that maximizes the amount of talent you have on the team. And to that to that degree, or to that point, you're probably right that it's easier to find that guy at a 9 than on the wing. Elite wingers are much more hard to come by. So that's a fair point, and probably one I don't give enough consideration to. But I do really think that I think there's a segment of the fan base that still just really underrates Jordan as a striker.
I agree with that for sure. I think the Sounders internally, frankly, even underrate him. I can't believe how many times I hear people in the organization talking about how they just aren't sure he's a number 9. And it's like, I don't know, I'm watching him be a number 9 every week practically. Yeah. And
I mean, he did it last year too, right?
Right. Exactly. Like, we're coming off 2 straight seasons of him being really productive at that position. But
anyway. It's strange, but I'm sure there's something I'm not seeing. I'm sure it's a me problem. This one's from Debate Pro. Since youth progress / player development isn't linear, what is Danny Leva's ceiling? His set piece delivery, passing higher up the field, free kicks are top notch. Should the Sounders be moving him higher up the pitch as a backup to Albert?
I think they should. Like, that to me is what he presents as his best path forward at this point. Is like, I don't see him as a starting number 10, but I do think his skill set is better used on that side of the field. And I think he makes sense as a backup to Albert. I think he can make sense in a dual 8 sort of setup. I don't think he is a double pivot. Like, I don't think that's his future. I don't think he's ever going to develop into a great double pivot. And at this point, he's being paid a fair amount of money. So it does behoove the Sounders to figure out, like, he's a talented player. I don't think anyone that watches him would deny that he has talent, and the Sounders need to figure out the best way to use him.
Yeah, for sure. I think this is a point that I think people make pretty regularly, but I know Relio has been making it for a long time, that the Sounders develop a lot of players with this kind of skill set where at a lower level, they're clearly like the main creator on a team, but it takes more to get to that level at the MLS level. So they get moved back a line. And I think it is okay at a certain point with a guy like Danny Leva to say he's probably not going to be what we want him to be as an 8. or certainly not as a 6, right? So let's just say, hey, as long as he's here, he's going to be an attacking player. He's going to be Rusnak's backup. Maybe he can play on the wing in certain setups. I don't know. And just stop trying to force the issue, because it can't be good for his confidence. And it's not really going to help him. I think he's just past the point where if you keep throwing him out there at the 8 and fits and starts, he's going to all of a sudden develop or figure something out. Because there are things I really like about his game. It's just the things that I don't like about his game get really outweighed, both because he's exposed and because he's not able to do the things that he is as good at, from those positions. It's similar, I think, to how when Rusnak was starting, as an 8 or in the past on the wing, and people were like, how is this guy a DP? How is this guy making this kind of money? And then he gets moved to the 10 and he's the best player on the team now, So I think it's a similar kind of situation. So
yeah. Like he's not, I think the challenge with Danny is that he's not as goal dangerous as Rusnak is.
For sure.
He might be a better passer.
Yeah. He's at least at the same tier, right? I think that as a guy that can spell Rusnak, or that you can bring on when you're chasing a lead to have another creative player on the field, that's for his age and what he's making right now, that's not a bad role for him. I just think it's probably time to stop trying to force the issue of him playing, linebacker, because it just doesn't seem like it's going to work out. Next one is from Twimberly23. Since Alex Roldan has come back from his concussion, he's been excellent and seems to have reclaimed the right back starting spot. If he continues to his return to form for the rest of the year, how does that impact our off-season DP shopping? The potential plan of moving Christian back a line doesn't seem as likely any longer. My initial thought is Christian moves to central midfield to either replace JP or partner a new 6, and you get a DP right winger.
Yeah, I don't know that. I think it's pretty likely that Christian ends up moving to central midfield. I will say that. I think that is something the Sounders are seriously considering. I think they feel like he has the engine. He hasn't really been asked to be a 6 at any point really in his career. Like, he's always been paired with a more defensive minded partner. And I think it's entirely possible that that's something that they're going to try next year, and sort of like maybe even a job share kind of situation with João Paulo if he's back. So I don't know. I think that makes a lot more sense than sticking him at right back. Because the problem with sticking him at right back is now you have a $1.5 million right back, and I don't think the Sounders roster is built in a way that allows for that kind of construction, even though that's not really the best way of looking at it. So yeah, I think that's probably what happens.
Yeah, I would say that Alex has been much better since he came back from concussion. I don't know that I would say he's been excellent. I still would like to see Christian at right back. I think he projects there really well.
Especially if it's like a more right wing back type of.
Yes, for sure.
Which we might see. I think that might be a way. Like, I saw some people on the Discord talking about how what you do when De La Vega is really back, and they could go back to that 3-4-2-1 formation, and that would sort of make sense with him.
Yeah, and I think too, like, with Alex on the cap number he's on, and he's probably most likely not going anywhere, and he certainly hasn't been bad. It's not the end of the world if Christian moves to the center. I think I'm totally fine with that if that's the path they take as well.
And I'm saying that more as a long-term solution than a short-term solution. But.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's Christian's flexibility is a blessing and a curse for him, I feel like, at times.
I think that this is the year where he's almost had it. It's funny because this was the year it started out as, no, he's going to be our right winger. We're making this commitment. And then it devolved into, actually, Christian, the reality is the best thing for us is for you to just play wherever you need or wherever we need. And that's just going to be your role. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things where, but I mean, realistically, like, is he elite anywhere?
Yeah,
At
I
this,
don't know.
like, I don't
At this
know, and
point,
I
I don't
think
know.
that flexibility maybe is what keeps him being at the level he is and as valuable as he is. So
Yeah.
one of those things.
Well, this one's from Joshua, and this is another one that we've been debating a lot. Barring winning MLS Cup, what would you consider a successful season this year?
I think that if it's a binary between this is either a successful season or it's not a successful season, I think winning Open Cup and winning at least one playoff series, not counting the play-in,
So
is
getting
kind of,
at least to the Western Conference semifinals.
yeah, I think so. That's what I would call a success. Realistically, I think it's more of a gradient than that. Like, I think it's more like the season wasn't a total failure, but I'm not willing to call it a success either, right? Because they sucked for a good portion of time. They, continued to get embarrassed by LAFC for, the 9th and hopefully not 10th consecutive game. So it's hard for me at this point to say anything other than winning MLS Cup is going to make me feel like this was a good season or a great season. But I think if they can get into the playoffs, win a playoff series, win Open Cup, I feel pretty good about that, right? Getting into the playoffs and losing in the first round, getting into the playoffs and not making it through the play-in, losing to LAFC in the Open Cup final, I don't consider that successful. No, it's not terrible.
I think it almost has to start with you got to win U.S. Open Cup. Barring winning MLS Cup, you got it. You got this far. You got a home game in the semifinal. You potentially got a home game in the final. You got to, like, the Open Cup has to be the most focused. Like, and it's crazy to think. It seemed like Brian was even admitting this, that they're going to focus on Minnesota this weekend because that's the next game, which makes sense. It's, you want to get off to a good start in league play, and then they're going to put everything they got into that Open Cup semifinal, which then leaves the Portland Timbers road game as sort of like, well, look, we'll do what we can. We can't promise you anything. And I think that's sensible. Like, this is the first time in a long time that, if they win the Minnesota game and they win the LA game, for sure, I do not care what happens in that Portland game. And I think that that's a totally sensible approach for this one. They already won a game in Portland. Like, because the thing is that they beat Portland in this game and they lose the season finale against Portland. I don't care that they won both games in Portland. They got, like, the important game against Portland at this point is the season finale. They got to win that game. They have to win that game. Like, that, talk about successful season. That's one of the elements of a successful season. They got to win that game against Portland at the end of the season.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I think that a season cannot be successful without it being a disaster. You know what I mean? Like, I think, like, 2013 was not successful, but they made the playoffs and they scored a bunch of goals and won a bunch of games. But by no metric was that season successful. 2021 they didn't make the playoffs, but 2022. So anyway, I think it's a much more it's more fun for me to not be binary about it and say, well, success. Anyway, next one's from Third String Star. Can Adrian continue to compete financially without a partner in this league, a la Rain Carlisle Group?
So this is a fair question, and I think I think yes, he can. The difference between the Sounders being able to compete and not compete is still a relatively small amount of money. Like, we're talking a few $1 million, which I assume Adrian can afford to spend, because if he can't, he really shouldn't be an MLS owner. Like, I'll just say that. So I think I feel pretty confident that he can afford to spend what is required. And it's really a matter of will and how much, like, I can't tell you why the Sounders weren't willing to invest more into the roster this year than they did. I don't have a good answer for that. I genuinely would like to know that myself. There's enough wealth within the Sounders organization that they should be able to finance a buyout if they need to buy a player out. They should be able to finance a big DP transfer if that's what they need to do. They should be able to finance U22 signings. Like I don't see any sign that they don't have the financial abilities to do those things. And it's part of why it's so baffling what's going on right now, where it feels like they're cutting corners and they aren't making the big plays. And I wrote about this, that there is sort of this negative cycle that comes where you don't invest. Like they want it to run like a sustainable business. And I think that's admirable, because I think if you don't have a sustainable business, then you're always going to be at the whim of some rich guy. And that's not a good place to be in either. But yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting to see what direction this organization goes in the next few years and where their focus is and how they spend money. And I do think a lot of it is probably tied into the future at Long Acres, and it's all interconnected. So we'll see. I don't know. I don't have a great answer for that, but I think they have the ability.
Right. I don't think it's a can. I don't think it's a can question at all. I will say the only thing I have to add is that no matter what, I would rather never have someone like the Carlyle Group involved in ownership.
Yeah.
I just, private equity is a whole thing.
Literal private equity. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not great. So.
All right. This is from friend of the show, Bill Jones Trumpet. He says, why did the Sounders pull away so much from the game day experience? I ask because on its face, it would seem like a financial decision, but they still have Soundwave, which I am an alumnus of and grateful for, and that is not a cheap asset. So why get rid of the Pioneer Square program or pregame, the events at the 90, and the other frills that made game day more of a great event and less of a product?
I think that kind of what I've settled on without any actual information and just, my assumptions, which is the best way to form an opinion, is that a lot of stuff just stopped during COVID, and
I think that's,
and I don't think it's limited to the Sounders. Like, I think it's a society-wide thing where people just stopped doing stuff during COVID and they never started doing it again. And it sucks. It's a bummer. The world is a much worse and less fun place than it was in 2019. In some ways. And it sucks. I miss all the pageantry. I miss all that stuff. And maybe it's a cost cutting decision or a cost saving decision not to bring it back, but I don't think it was an intentional thing. And I think when you've got people on the payroll, I guess, like Soundwave on the payroll, I don't know. But it's maybe they're not willing to say, yeah, we're going to stop doing this thing. Also, I think Drew Carey would be upset if they stopped doing Soundwave, right? So maybe that's part of it. But yeah,
I think you're right. I think that's probably that it is sort of a momentum issue where it was very easy to cut the pregame and then look at, okay, well, what are we really getting out of this thing? Maybe 100 people show up. It's not a cheap expense, blah, blah, blah. And they just never brought it back. I think it's, that it definitely limits the event feel of any game day. I did hear that the 90 is being reopened. I don't know in what capacity exactly, but I know the Sounders still have that space and they're going to start using it for events again. So it'll be interesting to see how much activation it gets on game day. It seems like that would be a no-brainer to make it a game day place. Like I've always thought, why not serve beer there? Like I would think that that's a license they could get. It would feel like that would be a really easy. I mean, I guess maybe they don't want to compete with their partners at the local bars. Maybe it's as simple as that. But it does feel like that's a missed opportunity that would be pretty easy to bring back. And I think they need to start looking for things like that, frankly.
Yeah, I can't imagine rent on that place is cheap.
No, if they have right, exactly. That's the thing, is that they're already spending the money,
right?
And it is funny because there's all these examples. You can look around the organization, and they're spending money on things. It's just that they're being like they did this rave gala and they raised $1 million or whatever for the Rave Foundation, but that could not have been a cheap endeavor. It had to be really expensive to put this on. And you see examples of this all, they when they did the brand redesign, that was hugely, hugely expensive. Long Anchorage was expensive, whatever. Like they're spending money. It's just that they're not necessarily spending it in the way that we would want them to. So that's why I get back to this idea that I don't think it's an issue of what they can spend. It's what they want to spend it on. So
yeah, it feels like the budget priorities have changed and not expanded necessarily.
Yeah.
Like obviously they're spending way more money than they used to, but they're not proportionately spending it on the same things.
Thank you for listening to the Sounder at Heart Podcast Network, which now includes Nos Arietes, Lobbing Scorchers, and the Cooler Guild. We've been independent since August of 2023, but need your support to make sure it continues. Although this podcast is free, it's only made possible by your continued support. Memberships start as low as $25 a year, which not only helps make podcasts like this one happen, but also gets you access to everything we produce. If you're able to support us at higher levels, starting at $75 a year, you gain access to a host of other perks, most notably entry into our members-only Discord, where the smartest, funniest, and most engaged commenters share their thoughts and ideas. To find out more, just visit sounderatheart.com and click the subscribe button in the top right corner. Thanks for listening.
This next one is from Too Old, Too Tired. Boy, I can identify with that. Any rumors about replacing Craig Weibel? Just watched his presser from this afternoon. Wow, he is so uninspiring and so unwilling to take personal responsibility for anything. Couldn't close any signings, needs a lot of data and analysis in order to even acknowledge that attendance is down. What a letdown after Garth.
Well, I will say I saw this. There was a lot of things that I think came out of Craig's press conference that were, to me, more influenced by their pre-existing frustrations with sort of the Sounders in general and maybe Craig Weibel in particular. I definitely, I was there. I wouldn't say it was inspiring, but I didn't necessarily get the sense that he wasn't willing to take personal responsibility, specifically about needing more analysis to acknowledge the attendance is down. That's not really what he said. He said he wasn't willing to chalk up the main cause of the attendance being down to the lack of transfer signings. He definitely acknowledged that attendance was down. That said, I don't get the sense that Weibel's job is on the line. I suppose it's always possible that he could leave for one reason or another, but I do genuinely think that the main reason that they haven't been able to make signings is just budgetary reasons. And I think Adrian is probably pretty realistic about why that, who's setting that budget, and it's not Craig. I don't think Craig is sitting there going I don't want to make signings. He knows his job is to make signings. He would like to sign guys. So I don't know. I have a hard time putting it to, at some point it will become inescapable. If we're having these conversations in 2026, which I believe is when when the recall election would be, or the confident, I don't know if they call it a recall election. I can't remember what they call it, but we'll get to vote on his job in 2026 if, assuming no one does file a recall. And if we're having that conversation, then he's going to be in trouble. But where we're sitting right now, I have a hard time putting too much blame on him specifically.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. And I think generally, I was actually quite encouraged by the press conference. I thought that he addressed all the things people have been frustrated that he hadn't addressed, and I think reasonably, rightfully frustrated. He outlined, kind of a plan going forward. He committed to spending, the team was going to spend money. He was very declarative about that. I thought he was we're going to be making some serious investments and major signings. And a lot of people's takeaway was still well, he didn't commit to, making a big signing. And it's that's literally the only thing I feel he committed to. So I don't know. I think that there was definitely some confirmation bias at play. There's probably some with me as well, which I'll acknowledge, right? Because I'm certainly of the opinion that he hasn't been the problem with this team, and that I tend to like him pretty well. So yeah, I'm sure that, my bias is a factor as well, but I was encouraged.
This is from Boomstick315, and he wants to know, how do we beat LAFC at Starfire?
I wish I knew. I mean, I do think that playing at Starfire is part of it. It's going to be a lot harder for them to do the stuff they're really good at.
Yeah, it's not a good it's not a place that is friendly to bunkering.
No, I mean, LAFC's, the whole thing with them is that they are extremely good at making you play their game. There were a lot of criticisms, I think, of the tactics in the Leagues Cup game. And to me, I thought the Sounders came out trying specifically not to let them do what they were trying to do. And they still managed to do it because they're just really good. And I think it's just going to be much harder for them to do that at Starfire. But they're also just a good team in general, right? So even if they can't do everything tactically the way they want to, I think it's still going to be a tough game. But I just think that the key is not getting scored on early. I mean, it's like we talked about this when we previewed the game in the last episode. Basically, we said any outcome in this game is okay except for the thing that happened, the exact same thing that happened, where they go behind early. They have to throw their whole plan out the window. I mean, it couldn't have gone worse. And I think it's the same thing, right? Like, you have to score a goal. You cannot let them score first. And you just can't let them boss you around. And it's funny to say boss you around about a team that plays the way LAFC does. But I mean, that is what they're doing. They're just doing it in a sort of passive aggressive way, I guess. But
it's remarkable. A few things are really remarkable about LAFC. One, they're 14-1-1 in the regular season when they score first. That's remarkable. If they score first, they are as good, if not better, than anyone else at just suffocating the game. They do this. They have a remarkable ability to take a lead and to hold the lead. Good for them. And the Sounders have fallen into that trap twice, both times on really avoidable goals. They got it. That's the first thing you're absolutely right. That's the first thing they have to do. But the other thing that they tend to do, like if you look at their their average point of confrontation in both these last two games, it's at something like 27 yards. That, like, the Sounders meanwhile are usually right around 40 to 45 yards, which is to say that LAFC lets you just sort of get in, like they will sit. They really will sit. And I really don't think that will work at Starfire. Like, for whatever reason, it is just not a venue that lends itself to sort of that bunker mentality. And I think that is one element that should give people hope. The other thing that might give people hope, and this is harder to like really grasp, and it might be really reaching, but they're going to be playing in the Leagues Cup final. They're going to be coming essentially off a championship match into this Open Cup match, which I feel like is inevitably going to have an emotional letdown. Either they win that game and they're going to presumably have some celebration, and maybe they will actually not take the Open Cup nearly as seriously at that point, although I don't think that's really in their DNA. Or if they lose, it's going to be like, I suppose there could be an emotional lift, but that's not usually how that works. I think that probably plays into the Sounders' favor potentially either way. Either like they're playing in the League Cup final a few days before on Sunday, frankly, so that they're going to be on one day less rest than the Sounders will be. So I don't know. And what's funny is that game was originally scheduled for Tuesday. That would have been brutal if they had to go Sunday to Tuesday.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I mean, if we can just, if you know, this works, if playing them on short rest works for us, we'll just have to make sure they're all scheduled like that going forward, right? They always have to play us on like 2 days rest on a turf field.
Exactly.
All right, this one's from Walter. What would have been good, realistic moves for the Sounders during the transfer window? I see a lot of criticisms about making no moves, but I don't know what plausible move would have made a difference for the team with so few games left in the season. Doing nothing seems better than signing a depth piece, so I'm curious what would have moved the needle for you.
I think the most obvious thing the Sounders could have done, or there's two obvious things that they could have done, and they didn't seem remotely interested in doing. One of them was buying out Raul and moving Raul and signing a DP9. That would have been a knock it out of the ballpark type of popular move. And they could have done that. My understanding is they may have even had a trade partner if they really wanted to do that to get Raul off their books. But they, for whatever reason, were not that interested in bringing in a DP number 9 this summer. So that's a bummer, but that's one thing they could have done. The other big thing they could have done, and I don't think this would have necessarily helped them in the short term, but I do think would have set them up longer term, is if they decided that they wanted to spend real money on a U22 signing. They could have done that. They absolutely, I think that would have changed the perception of the window, if not necessarily their level. I think it's realistic to say, look, you're not going to sign a 21-year-old who's going to drop in and impact the season with 9 games left in the season. That's fair. I think it would be fair to point that out. But those are two things they could have done potentially that would have moved the needle, I think, among fans. And that would have been, one of them could have potentially been a huge on the field move too. If they had gotten like the Dario Spikic move done, I think that would have been pretty good. It wouldn't have necessarily moved the needle as much, but I will say that I understand what Walter is saying here, which is barring their inability to do those two big splashy moves, it didn't make a lot. I agree. I don't think it made a lot of sense. Like, it would have been useful from a narrative perspective to say, well, we did something, so stop saying we didn't do anything. But from a real world perspective, they need someone who's better than Paul Rothrock. And that's right now, shockingly, not that easy to do.
Yeah, I do think that Rothrock's emergence has changed the calculus a little bit. And I'm a little more willing to, I think Craig made a good case for not wanting to make a signing for the sake of making a signing and wanting to make sure it was going to be somebody that challenges for minutes. And I think also, the fact that this is something I always have to be reminded of, the fact that the allocation money, that basically the cap space they have, as I understand it, is allocation money. Not using that cap space, not using that allocation money this year means it's available into next year. And it's, at least it's like it would be like $500,000 or something like that, right? So not insignificant, right? So I think that I do think that the approach that they took of let's try to sign guys that are worth more than we'd be paying them or paying for them made sense, just to see if they could get somebody who wanted the move for reasons that weren't purely salary, or who was desperate to get playing time, whatever it was, right? So I think that approach made sense. And yeah, so I think the right kind of signing would have been one that was them punching above their weight a little bit, and they weren't able to land one of those. But I do think that there is a case for them making a U22 signing, maybe trying to, find an attacking player or a striker that could potentially be the backup next year, or could potentially make Danny Basovsky movable, right? Or, a defensive U22 defensive midfielder, maybe signings like that. But I think that they looked at them, right? Like there was a period of time where I was just convinced they hadn't really tried to do anything other than the Dario Spikic move. And I don't think that that's true anymore. Like, I think that they were trying to do things and they just didn't find the right fit. And given how they've been playing, I'm more okay with that than I guess I thought it would be.
Yeah, I will say that I've been able to confirm that they looked at well over a dozen players, and some of them were trades, some of them were transfers. I don't know how many of those were serious inquiries where they were getting to the point of talking to agents or whatnot. But I think they did a fair amount of legwork. There's no credit for legwork. This is a results-based business. No one denies that. I'm not asking anyone to do that, but yeah, it was. I'll just say, I understood the premise that they were saying that they don't need to add depth, and they didn't. So I guess it's frustrating. I want them to sign players too, because I do think that signing players is part of the entertainment aspect of the business. But, only if it's not going to cost you in other ways. All right. This is from Eric NW. What do you guys make of Leo Chu's regression this season? He has only played about half the minutes he had at this point last year, and he has relatively little goal involvement. Is he still struggling with the early season injury? Is he just overtaken by Rothrock and RBW in the depth chart?
I think it's a little of both of those things. I think that Rothrock coming in and taking advantage of his minutes means Leo Chu's just not going to get as many opportunities. And I think Reed Baker-Whiting doing the same and also being younger and being more of a prospect and being homegrown is going to put him above the pecking order, all other things being equal. I think that the injury is probably part of it. Like, I think that the timing of the injury was rough for him because as he was working back into fitness, Rothrock was looking more and more like a guy who maybe was not just a fluke and getting lucky, but actually somebody doing things repeatably. And that was certainly part of it. But I think also it's just he hasn't progressed. And I think when you are a player who has a limited bag of tricks, he's really, really good at the things he's good at. And he's still a useful MLS player to some degree. But if you don't add new wrinkles to your game, you're going to get figured out. And he's not good enough at the stuff that he does, that he is good at, to get around that. Like, if teams know how to defend him, he's not going to beat them often enough for all of the shortcomings in his game to be worth it. It's one of those things. I think if Leo Chu was a starter on, another MLS team that didn't really feel the need to improve on him or whatever, he would be a perfectly serviceable player. But I just think that the combination of his lack of progression, the injury, and then other guys stepping up big time, and also some of the things he's bad at being things that Brian Schmetzer has a tough time tolerating guys not being good at, or at least, being a little more interested in doing, I guess I would say, is all of those are major factors.
Yeah.
All right. This one's from Sparky. Can you describe how Sounders practices run? Who leads the drills for field players? Goalkeepers off on their own for half practice? Who talks to the field players at practice, including during the run of play? Is Brian in the midst of other coaches or elsewhere, just trying to envision the daily regimen? Thanks. You're welcome, Sparky.
So Brian mostly is sort of off to the side, usually by himself, maybe talking to another coach, maybe talking to an individual player. But the trainings are mostly run by a combination of Freddie Juarez and Preki. They do most of the on the field directions. They are letting players know what they want them to do. Andy Rose sort of takes over on set pieces. He's the guy who draws up most of those plays. He has a lot of influence over the set pieces. And yeah, the goalkeepers are sort of oftentimes off to the side on their own, unless they're doing, short-sighted games or whatever. And they do play a fair enough. Almost every training includes some gameplay, whether that's short-sighted or full 11v11. There's almost always play with, where they're actually playing a game of some sort, which I feel like the Sounders practices are pretty well designed. I don't have a coaching license. I can't really critique that, but it does seem like they do a good job of changing things up, of including different aspects of things every week. They definitely focus on different things at different times. But yeah, generally speaking, it's mostly Freddie Juarez and Preki to a lesser degree who are doing most of the active coaching during training. I will say that if you have a chance to go out there, I think it's pretty interesting. And they do a pretty good job of bringing fans out. I don't know exactly how to do it, but if you reach out to a ticket rep, they'll probably be able to tell you how to go. And they have good vantage. Like the fans get a pretty good vantage point. So yeah, if you can get out there, I would encourage it. All right, this is from Square. This is our last question. what's the Sounders version of the Reigns Bolser Jalen Howell trade? Who are we trading away and who are you getting? And I will, in case you don't know, the Reign this week traded fan favorite and leading scorer Benethine Bolser to Louisville for Jalen Howell, who is apparently like kind of like an Ozzy Alonso-esque number 6. Very impressive numbers. I understand Bolser is clearly a fan favorite, but this on paper, this trade seemed like it was a pretty slick move by the Reign. But yeah, I don't know. You have any ideas of what kind of that trade might look like?
So I love this question. I've been thinking about it since I saw it yesterday. I think I have a Jalen Howell analog that I think makes sense both from the perspective of the kind of player he is and the kind of player the Sounders would maybe be targeting in a deal like this, and that would be Daniel Edelman from Red Bulls. I don't think he's quite as much of a finished product as Jalen Howell is. I think he's a little bit more of a rotational guy, or maybe just not a key player, because Jalen Howell was like their captain, right?
Yeah.
I mean, was. So there's really not like a great analog, but he's younger, defensive midfielder, very tenacious kind of player. But I can't really think of who the Sounders analog would be, and I've been trying to think about it. I don't think it's Jordan Morris. I think Jordan is
would it maybe be like a Paul Rothrock?
Maybe. But I feel like that's maybe not like that does a disservice to
Bolser.
Yeah, to Bolser, because she has a longer history here, and I think it's been at a higher level.
Maybe a Christian Roldan.
That was the other one I was thinking, but I feel like maybe that does a disservice to Christian. I don't know. I thought potentially, obviously, very different players, but just in terms of value and importance to the fan base, like Nuhu potentially.
Yeah,
that could be. I don't know.
This is. I would say this is more of a. The one I'm thinking of is not necessarily a like for player, but a comparably blockbustery type of trade.
Yeah,
maybe like a Jackson Reagan for a Duncan McGuire kind of situation.
I could see that. Yeah,
Jackson Reagan is a fringy national team player, a local kid. I think he's pretty popular among the fan base. Duncan McGuire, clearly very productive. He just signed a pretty big extension, but it would have definitely shook things up.
Now, here's one for you to think about. What if you flip it and it's the Sounders trading the younger player for the maybe more proven player? And I think it's Obed is the guy leaving, right?
Okay.
Who are you getting back? I think that's the interesting one, because the Sounders just don't really have a great Bethany Bolser analog, I don't think.
An Obed? But I feel like Christian might be the better analog for the outgoing there.
Do you think so? Because isn't Jalen Howell like fairly young?
She is. She's 24. She is young.
Okay. Yeah. Then I guess it would be Reagan in that case.
Yeah, I mean that the ages there are pretty spot on. Let's say but if they were going to trade I think the other thing that's challenging with it putting in Obed is this is a player who I think the Sounders realistically think could be a $10 million outward transfer. Like Jalen Howell is not she's probably an NWSL lifer, in part because the dynamics of women's soccer are just different. Where
sure, I was thinking she was younger than 24, so that
I'm pretty sure she's 24.
Yeah,
but she is like a fringe national team player. Yeah, I feel like Christian is would be an interesting analog. But let's say if you were to trade Christian, what are you looking to get back if you trade Christian? And this would be a painful move, I think, for Sounders fans.
It would. I mean, Christian is probably the Bethany Bolser analog, I think. He's probably the closest fit.
Okay, but what are the Sounders getting back if they were to trade Christian Roldan?
I would like to think that you could get... I mean, realistically, I think you're getting a lot of allocation money. is probably...
What about maybe a Lewis Morgan, maybe?
Maybe, yeah. I think it's going to have to be somebody who is a need, who is an established starter.
Yeah.
Who is not quite as good as Christian. right? So like probably a winger, probably a right winger, maybe a guy that you feel like can be like a rotational attacker that it projects as a starter, plus allocation, right? Because I think Christian's trade value in MLS is probably higher than Sounders fans think it is at this point. Like I think a lot of Sounders fans are probably a little down on
I'm telling you, this
Christian to
Lewis
some
Morgan
degree.
one's looking pretty good.
Yeah.
I'm looking
I can
at
see it.
He's coming back from injury. He 12 goals, 2 assists this year. He's 27 years old. So roughly,
I would not want to trade Christian for a 27-year-old, I don't think.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think that that's a bad move necessarily. Like it's not like he's 40, and he scores a lot of goals and but I don't know. I would rather try to get some less proven quality, more upside in a deal like that. Because I think if you're trading a player like that, it needs to be potentially transformative. Now, if it's Lewis Morgan and a huge fat stack of allocation money, that certainly changes things.
Yeah.
Because there's no easier way to set yourself up for future success than having a ton of allocation money. So,
yeah. Well, that's a good note, I think, to end this mailbag episode on. I will say that I wanted to say thank you to all our subscribers. Like I said earlier in the show, we're in the midst of our 1-year anniversary of independence. So far, the renewal drive seems to be going very well. Somewhere in the high 90% renewal rate, I think. I'm trying to get better data on that, but I think that's about right. So we're tracking around where I hoped we would be. I'm certainly not freaking out or anything. So this is good. We're gonna have some more content around the anniversary coming up. But I want to say thank you to everyone who's made this possible. It's far exceeded what I thought we were going to be able to do. Aaron, it's been fun doing this with you. Looking forward to doing this for a lot longer. Thank you to our sponsor, Full Pull Wines. They've been another huge part of being able to make this all work. But with all that said, I'm going to sign off. I'm Jeremiah Shan. Signing off for Aaron and Lickett. This is No Sadietis. Remember, you'll never yell alone.
We love you. Let's win another one!